Studies have shown that the diagnosis of anxiety in children and teenagers has gone from about 6% a little over 15 years ago to 12% in 2018 to 30% today in 2022. I see a lot of these anxious children and teenagers in my counseling practice, and sometimes their parents aren't sure how to know if their anxiety is kind of within a normal range or if it's problematic or above average. They're not always sure if it's anxiety that's the problem or if there's some other behavioral issue going on. And so I recently had the opportunity to do a workshop for parents to help them understand what to look for and how to better help their child. So we decided to split that workshop up into a series of videos for you, and we hope that you will find it helpful for your family.
What signs should I look for in my own child to know if their anxiety is higher than normal? So I'm going to go through a lot of things here and just kind of talk to you. So that's why I left this just as a hey, jot down what might feel significant to your child. We are going to do a Q&A at the end, and we got a lot of good questions submitted, so I'm not really sure how much time we'll have for further questions. But I'm going to give you my email address at the end. So if you have more, you can continue to submit those. But here's a few. So social avoidance, and there's a lot of things that fall under that. So social anxiety can include wanting to avoid any type of social situation, being obsessed with their appearance, how I look. Is my hair cool enough? Am I, dressing in a way that's going to attract the kind of people that I want to attract to me? Worrying about my clothes. Fear of rejection, huge, huge, huge for kiddos. The fear of being rejected. Feeling like I'm really socially awkward. I'm just awkward, and that makes me different from everybody else. I stand out. I'm not normal. I would say if you feel like your child is maybe in that sort of social anxiety zone, also kind of be aware, this will go back to nurture, of introversion. So my next kind of point here would be introversion or extroversion that are really to an extreme can be a sign of anxiety. So introversion, we tend to think of, again, as a personality trait, and it is a personality trait. Some people, when we clinically define that, it's being filled up by alone time and finding social situations draining. Extroversion would, again, sort of clinically be being filled up by social situations and struggling to be alone. And so we want to be able to distinguish, when do I think this is my child's personality versus when has that maybe personality trait, again, gotten sort of maladaptive or outside of God's design, and it's now become an avoidance tactic. There's actual fear involved. So a good example of this would be my middle son, Levi. He's my socially avoidant introvert. And when he was younger, he did not want to do anything with peers. He did not want to go to any school activities. He didn't want to go to youth group. But as we began to work through that anxiety component, and he began to embrace, okay, I'm just kind of introverted, but I still want people in my life. I still like people. To improve his social skills, to work with him on those things that were making him feel fearful, then he was able to begin to connect with his awesome group of friends. He has now got a great group of friends that he's been going through high school with. But what's funny about Levi, that now he knows this about himself, he kind of knows his bandwidth. So if they want to have an all-day thing and then sleep over, he's like, I can't sleep over. That's not for me. Or they're going to stay up till midnight. I think I'm going to go around 10. Because he's got to have his alone time at the end of the day to decompress. That is what we would call an adaptive coping mechanism. It's not preventing him from having friendships and relationships. It's not preventing him from having a life, but he's able to accept some things about himself that keep his mental health good. So when navigating introversion versus social anxiety, that's kind of what we're aiming for. It is knowing that difference. Not just pushing our kids all the time, you've got to be social, but neither are we wanting to say, it's okay to just sit in your room all the time and because you're anxious, right? Another component that I mentioned was extreme extroversion. So we actually think of extroverts as not being anxious typically, but totally a misnomer. oftentimes extroversion is a coping mechanism on the opposite extreme. It says, I'm actually inwardly anxious, and so I'm going to cope with that by talking a lot and smiling and making jokes and being the life of the party. I'm showing up as an extrovert, but inwardly, like, I'm in panic mode right now. Somebody's smiling, so somebody relates with that. But yeah, so, don't mistake that. If you have a child who's an extrovert, by nature, it doesn't mean that they might not still also be struggling inwardly with some anxiety, fear of rejection, or things like that. So tests, fear of tests, or academic pressure. This is something I am seeing at younger and younger ages now. And, some of it can be good. Again, it's finding that boundary line between kind of performing to the best of your ability, but not feeling you just have to push and you have to be the best. And if I don't do this, I won't get it. I've heard kids say, because I forgot my homework, I was afraid I would fail that class, I wouldn't get into college, I would never get a job, and I would ruin my future over like one piece of homework in 6th grade. But that's the pressure that they're feeling under, and having those spirals and not really understanding like it's a worksheet, or it's, so sometimes that academic pressure can be really, really bad. And I'll just kind of add here, like with a chuckle and a smile, sometimes parents are the worst culprits at pressuring this. Unfortunately, I hear a lot of, hey, I just don't think my child is operating at the highest ability that they can. And sometimes that is true, but it's not always true. And I get a lot of tears in my office over, I got in trouble for getting a B, and my parents don't understand, it's so much harder this year. Or I've been doing I'm studying so much, I'm falling asleep in class, but my parents are upset. So I'm hearing that a lot. I'm also hearing the college thing. Parents really, really pushing, they want their kids to get into a good college. And, in freshman year, there's kids having breakdowns over that. And so, learning to kind of walk that line of, yes, we want to encourage and we want to nudge. I'm going to give you more information about that. I keep kind of alluding to what's coming next. But knowing that they really do most kids really do feel a large degree of academic pressure. And just the same as the introvert-extrovert kind of dynamic, sometimes the kids that are doing nothing, it's actually also for that same reason. It may not just be laziness. Sometimes they get into an all or nothing. So think about the fight or flight. A fight mechanism kind of tells me, go, 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 go. But what does flight do? I completely shut down. So sometimes the anxious child that has that academic performance fear will push themselves harder and harder. But every once in a while, you get one actually that will do nothing. And it's not a child who's not smart. It's not a child who's lazy. They're so overloaded that they're like, why even try? I see that actually more so in college students that end up sort of failing out because it's a different world for them than they had experienced in high school, and they don't know how to keep up, and they just check out. It's easier to drop the class. It's easier to fail out. It's easier to leave. I don't know how to cope with this or what to do with this. So that's something to watch for as well. Disordered eating. So over or under eating, emotional eating can be signs of anxiety, also depression though. A lot of kids, and this can be one of those things you have to kind of be wise with, but a fear of getting in trouble. So, I think that's normal. No kid wants to get in trouble, right? We don't like consequences. Scripture tells us a lot about that, right? Discipline is not fun. But for some kids, it's actually a really, really heightened fear. It could be the way that a parent is disciplining. Again, as we talked about kind of triggering experiences, it could be sometimes something that's actually happened at school. It has nothing to do with you, but maybe a teacher that was really hard on them. So, like in a counseling setting, a lot of times we're kind of probing for that. Why is that fear so strong? But some kids are so deeply fearful of getting in trouble that actually propels a lot of their actions, like an unhealthy fear. Not that healthy fear, like, they need to kind of have that healthy fear of mom and dad, a healthy fear of consequences. Again, I'm talking about something that would be really maladaptive. We already talked about perfectionism a little bit in the performance anxiety and kind of, nature nurture debate, but perfectionism can be that checking out. People pleasing. People pleasing shows up in so many ways. I almost probably don't need to talk about that because I bet a lot of adults know about people pleasing, right? The ways that it can kind of manifest. How I'd like to define that is actually fear of man. Biblical counseling tends to refer to people pleasing as fear of man, because when we hear people pleasing, it almost sounds good. And it almost sounds like a personality trait. Oh, I'm a people pleaser. But when I think about, I'm actually called to please God, not men, right? And if God is for me, who can be against me? What can man do to me? Even Paul talks about pleasing people versus pleasing God, and that he is called to please God. He's not going to make everybody happy. So I really like that distinction of saying, fear of man versus fear of the Lord, because then both adults and children can learn to say, I really need to filter my decisions vertically. I really need to say, what would God have me do? What pleases God in this situation? And it might please some people and make some people happy, but it might make other people unhappy, and other people might not understand, and they might judge. But if I'm living vertically, if I'm living in fear of the Lord, then I don't really have to worry about what other people think about me. Not that I'm going to go out and hurt people's feelings and cause harm, but that I'm not making my decision based on, if I don't do this, they won't like me, or I might get kicked out of that group, or that kind of peer pressure component that can come in. People pleasing, again, it manifests itself in so many ways in kiddos. Not wanting to try new things unless you can be the best at it. I see that a lot as well. Kids are so afraid of failure. This is one of these that I'm kind of speculating that maybe media has really had something to do with, because again, it's a normal childhood thing to kind of be afraid of failure. I don't like to practice my piano, or I don't want to try. But this feels for me, I don't have research here. This is just me seeing clients. But it feels for me like this is kind of growing. This tendency in kids to say, unless I could be the superstar, unless I could be the best, unless I could be the top, I'm not going to do it. And they're really struggling to figure out how to do or try anything that takes work, that takes effort, that takes repetition or practice or messing up, getting it wrong in order to learn. They're so afraid of failure, they just won't even try. So, that's definitely an anxiety manifestation, but I'm curious about it if you have thoughts, because I'm seeing more and more of that. Of course, nightmares and trouble sleeping can be a manifestation of anxiety. Again, this is one of those things that I would say depending on your child's age, because nightmares are normal to an extent. We all have them sometimes. But when nightmares are really bad in a child or an adult, it is typically reflective of something else that's going on that they haven't been able to process. So even if you think about adulthood, sometimes adults have nightmares of things like, the nightmare that you got to school on the first day of high school naked or whatever, displaying actually anxiety about maybe a job, going into a job situation. So not that we want to be Freudian about our nightmares, but the idea being they're simply sometimes like unexpressed anxiety coming out. And so oftentimes when a child is having a lot of nightmares, that is the first place that I start in counseling. Because oftentimes it's a manifestation of something they don't know how to talk about, they don't know how to process, so they're thinking about it when they go to bed, and then they're waking up in the middle of the night with some strange nightmare that's actually rooted in something that they're anxious about. Trouble sleeping, I would put in a different category, actually, because trouble sleeping can be a little bit more of like a generalized anxiety sign. A lot of people, children and adults with anxiety, will have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep because of like anxious thoughts, racing thoughts, or even if their thoughts are not a problem, their body, because their nervous system has been activated all day long, they don't know how to calm it down. Here there actually is research about our devices and our cell phones. So when you think about the notifications that go off on your phone during the day, they cause that little surge of adrenaline, fight or flight. Oh, who is it? Who could it be? Do I need to answer it, right? But it's going off all day long. So it's kind of like I talked about with little t trauma. It's a super little low level of adrenaline, but over and over and over all day long. So that is actually something that is beginning to kind of wire people toward anxiety just in terms of a baseline. Maybe not anxiety that's related to something specific, performance anxiety or social anxiety, but their whole baseline stress level is too high because they're in go mode all day long. They're go, 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 go. And so, you know, you're seeing probably, you've read about digital detoxes are becoming more and more popular. Digital detox camps, you know, turning off the phones for different things. So it's not just about like attention span and those kinds of things, but our actual physiology is almost learning to become comfortable with the experience of constant stress and anxiety because of our phone use. So something to think about.